Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the Rules Committee for considering my amendments. You know, as we discuss current appropriations bills, I think it's important to remember whose money's being spent this week. It's not the discretionary, personal discretionary fund of any single member or an interest group. It's money earned by a mother of four in Massachusetts who's working to buy school supplies in August, or the income of an Oklahoma farmer who spends his spare time repairing decades-old machinery to stay solvent. When we talk about government spending, we're really talking about the money of the American people. During the federal spending debate in the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Mr. Elbridge Gerry, a delegate from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, noted that the House of Representatives was more immediately the representatives of the people, and it was a maxim that the people ought to hold the purse strings. It's time that we ask some of the ever-expanding federal agencies to make the same sort of tough decisions that Kansas families tell me they have to make. If families across the country can cut a nickel or a dime out of every dollar they spend, so can some of our federal agencies. Today, I'm asking the Rules Committee to consider amendments that will begin to restore Congress's responsibility to taxpayers. We have a duty to be good stewards of the resources instead of spending without restraint, which is all too common here in Washington. We throw around numbers like billions and trillions without considering the real impact on American citizens and the children and grandchildren of this country. My amendments would simply reduce the discretionary spending in Divisions A through E and Division G of H.R. 4502 by 1%, a mere penny from every dollar this bill would spend. This would be amendments number 7 to Division A, number 4 to Division B, number 4 to Division C, number 3 to Division D, number 3 to Division E, and number 11 to Division G. I want to remind everybody that this proposed cut's not really a cut, since this spending levels have all increased since the previous year. And only in Washington can you actually spend more money and still be criticized for cutting spending. Yet this is a critical step securing our finances and reducing a long-term tax burden on future generations. Today, our nation's debt is more than $28 trillion. With a number so large, it's hard to understand how much taxpayer money we're talking about. $28 trillion has 12 zeros behind it. And every American, adult and child, bears a burden of more than $85,000 each. Following the global pandemic and trillions of dollars spent in relief, and some spending spent under the guise of relief, we're looking at another $600 billion in spending on these 7 appropriations bills alone. Do hardworking Americans across the country want their $85,000 burden to grow even more? Instead, we can take a common sense approach to reduce the non-defense and non-veterans affairs discretionary spending in H.R. 4502 by only 1%. I admit it isn't a magic bullet to get our fiscal house back in order, but it's a step in the right direction that recognizes the responsibility of spending the hard-earned money of our constituents and sets us up for future success. Every member should have the ability to vote on these amendments, which should also receive bipartisan support. Whether Republican or Democrat, all Americans know we're headed toward a financial disaster if we stay on the same path. A family in Maryland or a small business in North Carolina can't survive spending so much more than they take in. The only way we'll get spending under control is to stop spending more than we bring in, and a small 1% is a start. It's time for Congress to hold federal agencies responsible for the funds they use. We need to rein in spending, reduce our bloated deficits, and get our nation's debt under control. America's future generations depend on it. I urge you to make these amendments in order so that they may be debated and voted on by the full House of Representatives.
Thank you.